So for the next roundtable discussion, we will be exploring race in America, truth and reckoning, asking ourselves and one another if restorative justice offers a framework for America. Our panelists are as follows. Shailly Agnihotri, which you've heard previously, restorative justice advocate and founder of the Restorative Center. Jonnae Miller, St. Louis, Missouri, student activist researching Michael Brown's death, the Ferguson Report and police response in St. Louis. Deleso Alford, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Southern University Law Center, professor and scholar who has published extensively on the unique and particularized lived experiences of Black women. Charles Joseph Barjon II, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, artist and activist advancing restorative justice in the undergraduate community at Southern University. Timothy Roundtree, Queens, New York, attorney and parent raising 2 young Black adults with hope and anguish. Gilbert King, New York, New York, Pulitzer Prize winning author of Devil in the Grove. Key Jackson, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, student activist researching the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of South Africa and its viability for application in the United States. Latoya Jones Burrell, Minneapolis, Minnesota, author and educator envisioning a path forward towards racial reconciliation. Janera Freeman Morris, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, law professor and community activist. And with that, I'll let you guys take it away.
Sure. Janera has been promoted. Hello. It's so fun to run a conference on Zoom. Things I never thought I'd have to learn. But hello, we're all here. This is amazing. Are we missing anybody? Did everybody make it? We all made it. Beautiful. So we're going to use the circle format. And I would like to begin our circle doing what we sometimes do in high schools. And I know we have some educators joining us and the high school students love it, so we might love it too. Somebody, Charles, pick a number from 1 to 625.
8.
8. Oh, nobody ever goes for a small number. So what we sometimes do to open circles is just ask a volunteer to pick a number, and we've been using Nelson Mandela's autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom, just because it's a beautifully written book and it's thick and it's fun, and asking people to say a number, one of the students, and then asking them to volunteer to just read a paragraph from the randomly open page, which also helps sort of break away the idea that narratives have to be told in a particular linear fashion. We can just pick up wisdom where we can. It also is fun activity for people to embrace randomness and the magic of it. Okay, and of course, I hate reading from books because of my dyslexia, but I will do my best. My mother presided over 3 huts, which I remember were always filled with the babies and the children of my relations. In fact, I hardly recall any occasion as a child when I was alone. In African culture, the sons and daughters of one's aunts or uncles are considered brothers or sisters, not cousins. We do not make the same distinction among relations practiced by whites. We have no half-brothers or half-sisters. My mother's sister is my mother. My uncle's son is my brother. My brother's child is my son, my daughter. Page 8. So the way I'd like to ask everyone to share a lesson that they've learned from an elder that they've been reflecting upon. And what the lesson I've been, the relative that I've been really reflecting upon is my maternal grandmother, who is a story of resiliency and strength. She had 15 minutes to leave an ancestral home, and the family became refugees when the Indian-Pakistani border was formed. And she gathered her children, gathered apparently a little pouch with some jewelry from her marriage, and they were refugees. And she held the family together. She educated her children. She fed them. She taught them. I have images of her reading a newspaper in a time where, you know, she was always extremely involved in the world in a very articulated way. And now she has grandchildren all over the world doing amazing things. From that one point of ricochet, it actually transforms the family in a way that she could not have seen that her resiliency and strength would do so. So I want to honor her today. And so from there, I go to Jonnae.
Hello. I'd like to honor one of my advisors from college. Oftentimes when I faced adversity in education, I would go to her office and we just have talks. And one thing in particular that really sticks out to me that she's said to me is that it's okay to get knocked down, it's okay to have bad days, but it's not okay to stay down. And furthering from that, she talked about how no matter what, we have to get up and fight the fight. And she talked about finding confidence in knowing that when you're placed inside of a ring, you're placed inside of it because you have what it takes to achieve victory. So going into a little background about me going into college, I went to Fisk University in Nashville, left my hometown in St. Louis, Missouri on August 8th, 2014. And the next day was an unforgettable day for me in particular because I was moving into my college dorm and I was excited to just get the college experience. However, it was an even more unforgettable day for my community back home in St. Louis because on August 9th in 2014, that was the day that we were made aware of the horrific tragedy and the tragic death of Michael Brown. And he was murdered by a Ferguson police officer. And I feel like over those next few days, I just watched as my city had experienced days of civil unrest. And I feel as if her quote throughout me going in school as well as combating the issues of today is very, very powerful because it is a time in which we're fighting for true equality and true justice, and it seems endless. However, we have to remember that we can't allow the devastations and the things that we're seeing every day from the media to obstruct us from seeing that end goal, and we can't allow it to distract us or discourage us from continuing the fight. And with that, I'll pass it to Deleso.
We can't hear you.
Okay, I unmuted myself and then you helped me mute. The person that I would like to honor is my paternal grandmother, Gertrude Sims Alford. My movement throughout my life has really been, I guess, a testimony to what she told me when I left home for college. She told me, don't let your name beat you back home unless it's good. And throughout my journey, I always draw on that because I know she was telling me to be mindful of being connected to home and be mindful of my actions. And I share it with my children, my students, with everyone, because I think if the best way to honor home and the sacrifices of home and as Shailly said, the resilience and the strength is to honor that by doing good in this world or trying to do good. And with that, I will pass it to Charles.
Hi, I'm very thankful to be here. Hope everybody's doing well. And recently, I've had the words of the last emperor of Ethiopia on my mind, Haile Selassie. And he says that where there is no lack of goodwill, all international disputes can be resolved. All nations, whatever their political persuasions, can be together in peace. And just like the Boy Scouts slogan, do a good turn daily, this stays on my mind because, like I was saying in our breakout rooms earlier, I feel like international morality and the notion of having loving kindness has faded away in some part. And speaking of restorative justice within our legal system and within justice work, if we just had goodwill, If we just had a sound conscience and a clear mind, imagine the laws that could change, imagine the people who would be free today. And with that, I pass it on to Timothy.
Not yet, Tim. Tim, you're still on mute.
Yes, greetings, everyone. I'm so happy you started with a quote from my hero, Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela said, "Free yourself, free others, and serve every day." And I really try to adhere to those principles. Nelson Mandela is a hero of mine because not only was he a lawyer and a freedom fighter, he fought valiantly to end apartheid in South Africa, which for me personally, given my experience growing up, my parents were both children of the civil rights era. They saw the devastation of racism and segregation in the South, and that was apartheid for us in this country. So I am glad that I followed a path as not only a lawyer, but public defender, which in my mind makes me a freedom fighter. And with that, I'll pass it on to Gilbert.
Thank you, Tim. Hi, Shailly. It's really nice to see you again and really nice to be here as part of this panel today. I think the person I want to honor today is a man whose story I've been working on for the last 2 years. His name is Leo Schofield, and he's been in prison for the last 32 years, wrongfully convicted. And I've interviewed him 6 or 8 times in prison down in Florida. And I continue to be inspired by him. He does not carry any anger or bitterness when he has every single right to. He's passed on deals that would have freed him from prison decades ago because he insists on his innocence. And how he lives his life in those small walls, inside those small walls, is just an inspiration. He continues to better himself, taking classes and reading and fighting for his freedom. And I think the thing that is most inspiring, if he can find a way to go through his life experiencing one of the greatest miscarriages of justice imaginable, and still continue to focus on making his life a positive in the universe, I think I can learn a lot from that too. And so that is sort of the person I'm honoring today. And with that, I will pass it to Kyrie.
Hi, good afternoon, all. My name is Kyrie Jackson. No worries. So I guess the person I want to honor today is my paternal grandmother. So she has inspired me a lot, and I think the thing that I've been reflecting on these past couple of days and why I decided to honor her is her dedication to education and that influence it's had on me as an individual. I don't think I've respected it as much until I've gotten to an age where I continue to pursue education now as a law student. But so my grandmother definitely was living through the civil rights era in New Orleans, and a lot of stories that she's told me, but she still pursued her education to the extreme with 2 master's degrees and everything that she's done. And to me, I feel like I've been able to reflect on that impact to see how powerful education is, not only for an asset that no one can take away from you, I think is kind of what I've taken from it, but also to kind of keep pursuing my ultimate goal as well. So that's who I wanted to honor today. And the next person is Latoya.
Thank you. So the person who I'm honoring is following the trend. Is also my paternal grandmother. Her name is Elaine Nash Jones. And I'll share a fun fact. My parents were teenagers when I was born. So because of that, I was able to meet all of my grandparents and all of my great-grandparents. So I sometimes meet people who will say they never got to meet a grandparent. And I'm like, not only did I get to meet my grandparents and great-grandparents, but they all were alive until I was a teenager, frankly. And one piece of advice that my grandmother has been given lately is she talks about the need to preserve the knowledge from our church. And so when my great-grandmother passed away a few years ago, my grandmother said, I think that we should do something to preserve the knowledge in the history of our church so it's not forgotten. And I think that that's so often the case in so many places. If we're not careful and if we're not intentional to preserve history, to make sure, number one, that the things that are not so positive do not repeat, but that they're not forgotten, and that if it's something that's good and positive, it can be preserved and passed on and honored. I also think knowing our history and our past allows us to be secure in ourselves by knowing who we are. So that is who I would honor, my grandmother, Elaine Nash Jones. And with that, I will pass it on to Janera.
Hello. The person I'm going to honor today is my dad, Reverend A.C. Freeman Sr. And I was a daddy's girl. It's 5 of us anyway, so I don't, I guess we all were dad's girls. So he said success is the legacy you leave behind. So not just successful as far as what you do in everyday life, as far as education and what titles you hold, but the people that you touch. So that guarantees that you're successful if people at the end can say that you were kind, you were a good person, that you had knowledge of who you were and you never compromised on who you were. So with that, I'll pass it on to Shailly.
Thanks. So one of the things I'd like to ask you guys is, in your work, in your studies, what an unexpected truth or profound truth has been revealed to you about race relations? And there, I'm sure there are many, but just to get the conversation going. And one of the ideas that I had was that, and this is with regard to restorative justice and circle work, is that the way that the restorative justice models are currently being articulated, that I'm pushing back against and holding sort of a boundary around our work and other models, is that we do not believe that conversations begin with first a person in handcuffs and also a forced forgiveness. Because the thought is that before you cannot get to reconciliation till there's a reckoning, and the reckoning requires conversations we have yet to have. And it requires work that we've yet to do. And that is, in fact, the work. And so this is sort of an idea about race relations that I've sort of been working on. And we've been looking at the South African model, but we'll come back to that. But that's something I wanted to start with. Jonnae.
I guess a unexpected, but in my view, I guess it would be a not so unexpected truth that I've been able to come to in my research would be the harsh reality of discriminatory practices within the Ferguson Police Department. And Ferguson is a county inside of St. Louis, for those of you who may not know. And for decades, the Ferguson Police Department has blatantly engaged in patterns of unconstitutional arrests and stops and searches of citizens of Ferguson. And throughout my research, I have found that most of those misconducts are fueled based on the focus of them generating revenue for the Ferguson community, as well as racial biases in which African Americans are disproportionately targeted. African Americans in the Ferguson community make up about 60%. And as far as when they're given citations and when they're arrested, they make up over 90%. So the fact that it took the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Criminal Justice to come into St. Louis and to go into investigation of the Ferguson Police Department to expose the community to concrete examples of those injustices, it's kind of shocking to me because of the fact that I so often am told stories about police officers using physical force and excessive force when greeting citizens. One in particular, my cousin, he often tells me about, he jokes about when you're pulled over by the police in the county, because we refer to that area as North County. But when you're pulled over by the police in the county, be careful, make sure you don't leave out with any scars, and make sure that you're able to pack a punch or take a punch. And that's extremely disheartening to know that it took the death of Michael Brown for that to become a part of the conversation. So I've looked into the Ferguson Report, which is a document that was created by the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice when they went into investigation of the Ferguson Police Department. And they gave numerous accounts of the police department using practices that were unconstitutional and violations of the First Amendment, in violation of Fourth Amendment. And one in particular that I wanted to share today really quickly would be the fact that this was in July 2013. The Ferguson Police Department was on their way to arrest a suspect. And while on the way there, they encountered another African-American male who they knew was not the man that they were going to arrest, but they handcuffed him anyways, placed him in the patrol car, and ran his record. From running his record, they found out that he was the landlord of the person whom they were coming to see, and they used him to effect the arrest. And then later on, that guy filed a complaint alleging racial discrimination and unlawful detention. And something that I think was also surprising from this is that oftentimes the laws back up what the police are doing. So in this particular instance, despite the unreasonable seizure issued by the police department, the sergeant of the Ferguson Police Department vigorously defended their actions, and he characterized the detention as minimal by saying that the car was air conditioned, so it really didn't have that much of an effect on him. So I just feel as if the way in which they're targeted and the fact that the current budget right now is $180 million for the police department in St. Louis, whereas the public defender's budget is only $51 million. So I feel as if just looking at those disparities and seeing the ways in which our community is generating money and encouraging harsh punishment on the citizens was very disheartening to me, and it was, I guess, not so unexpected, but expected. So that being said, I'll pass it to Professor Alford. I'm sorry.
Deleso. Okay, thank you so much for sharing, because when you, Jonnae, when you spoke about your cousin joking about that, be careful when you get pulled over, that is to me a reality. That's a lived experience, and it's a reality. And the deep truth or unexpected truth, it should have been expected, should be expected, but it was unexpected when it happened. I teach law and racism, and I've taught race and law to law students, specific course on the impact of race and races on the law. And to see law students being exposed to a reality such as racial profiling, and the deep truth is to have diverse students in the classroom, students from all walks of life, socially constructed students from different areas, to be exposed to this topic, racial profiling, but not believe that it actually occurs like people in society. What I bear witness to is, and this is my deep truth, is that minds can change. Minds can change in a moment's notice. And I'm going to speak to a particular classroom setting in which the students were diverse, and if you say from different walks of life, and socially constructed, Black, white, and other races. And we were talking about racial profiling. And when one of the students, my law student, socially constructed Black male, told the class, shared his lived experience with the class about being pulled over by the police, and his wife was pregnant, and how she cried because he was a taller, bigger man, and how she was so scared that he was going to be shot just by virtue of being pulled over. And as he's telling the story, he began to cry. because of that moment, because he had the passion for his wife, and he wanted to live. Well, the impact of him sharing his lived experience with someone who was socially constructed, had a different life. It was a socially constructed white female student. After hearing her peer, this is somebody she studied with, this was a study partner. After hearing this experience, she then said, I didn't believe in racial profiling. I heard people talk about it, but I never knew it existed like I know it exists now. And for me, that was the truth that one would expect when intentional curriculum integration of race and races is in a classroom. You want that diversity, you want that lived experience being shared, and you want people to come to some understanding that it may not have happened to me, and it may not ever happen to me because of society, but this person that I sit next to, this person that I study with, it happened to him, and he's really afraid. And when she expressed how she didn't believe, and then now she did believe, it told me that minds can change when they are exposed to that alternate reality, and that they're open to understanding that this is not some far-fetched idea of something happening, that it is real. So that exposure of alternate realities, I bear witness to that happening. And then that's that deep conversation that of mixed company, if you will, that we understand this is a person, this person I know, and they've been racially profiled, and they're telling me they've been racially profiled. So that is my unexpected truth, but deep truth. But to see it happen was for me, it was good for me, because I needed to know that the idea, or I guess it's beyond an idea, the intentional curriculum programming can impact the next generation of decision makers. And that's the reality that I think that we need to really hold on to and continue. Pass on to Charles.
Indeed, and when you were saying that, this poem came to mind, and the first lines say, perspective changes sight, the same way sunglasses alters our light. And that was just truly, you personified that entire poem with that example, because you truly don't understand how the experiences of other people affect individuals until you actually live it, or you actually see it happen. And I think most of these unexpected truths are truths that we come to know as reality already. And concerning especially race relations, the truth has been known. And as my work as a student activist at a grassroots level, I confront many organizations who have notions of, I'd say, condescending notions and sensitive notions at their core without even realizing it themselves. So the unexpected truth would be this game that we play, this legal system, and that is a historical bias that we must get over. That is the unexpected truth I've come across, that there's a historical bias. And like you were saying before with the previous question, Mrs. Burrell, about history and how good history and bad history is all history. So regardless of what it is, it must be shared down because we can't repeat it. So that's my unexpected truth, historical bias, and that it can't be forgotten, and that racism lives today, and it's nothing new, but we can conquer it together. I'll pass it on to Timothy.
Tim, we can't hear you.
I have to remember to do that. My unexpected truth has a lot to do from my lens as an African-American male and a public defender representing low-income individuals who are charged with crimes here in New York City. We all know law enforcement and legal system is not only designed for control, but I realize it's far more sinister than that. It's designed to oppress. It's designed to make us feel disengaged. And I see that daily as an advocate, because a lot of the arguments I make for people who can normally afford an attorney, the same arguments that lawyers make for their clients who are paid somehow are frowned upon when public defenders make them. So you can only come to the conclusion that it's more than control, it's submission and disengagement and oppression. And I've seen the bad and ugly of the system, and there is no good involved, but we must realize that the system is doing exactly what it's designed to do. And we must continue to fight against that. I was struck by the words from this morning from Cori Bush, when she said that she was activated based on Mike Brown's death in Ferguson. And the type of oppression that we see on the streets, particularly with police brutality and the injustices in our criminal justice system, whether they want to believe it or not, or see it or not, or accept it or not, it's designed to make us less engaged, but it's having the opposite effect. It's engaging us more, and we should understand that whether it's Black Lives Matter or whatever advocacy you choose to engage in, don't let the system disengage you. You have to engage, because they want us to be disengaged. And so all this has to do with history, all this has to do with control, certainly, but it's beyond that. It's designed to silence our voices, and we have to advocate and become engaged advocates on every level. So that's my truth. And pass it on to Gilbert.
Well, thanks, Tim. I actually want to echo a little bit of what Charles just said about historical bias. And this is a truth that it was unexpected to me at some point while I was doing my research. It's probably not an unexpected truth to anybody on this panel, but one of the things I wanted to talk about is Brian Stevenson, who's had a really large impact in my work. He talks about truth and reconciliation. And one of the things that he says is you cannot get to reconciliation without truth. The stories are important. You have to get to the stories. And through my research, I do a lot of work on law enforcement back in the Jim Crow and the pre-civil rights era. And one of the things when I first started doing this research, I was kind of not surprised, but I was overwhelmed by the cruelty and the violence on behalf of law enforcement to communities. And one of I think the unexpected part of that was people would just look at that as they do sometimes today and say, well, it's just a bad apple. It's a couple bad law enforcement people. What I really found through the research was that there was complicity at every single level, from the judge, from the prosecutor, from the governor of the states that I worked in, all the way up to the US attorneys. And basically what that ended up revealing to me was this disinterest in civil rights, all the way up to the Department of Justice and the FBI, because there was nothing politically to be gained from being an advocate for civil rights. Voter rights were so disenfranchised, and there was just no political power. And so there was no benefit to any of these state attorneys, US attorneys, judges, to have any interest in something that would be seen as a civil rights crime. They basically would just brush it under the table and go on business as usual. And I think the truth that I came to realize is that this has not gone away. There is still this built-in system of legalized white supremacy that still exists. It's definitely changed and mutated over the decades since the civil rights movement, but it's still a fundamental core and the bones of our criminal justice system. And I think as a white person coming in and seeing this, to me, it was just overwhelming, because I felt like I've been led to believe that this great country of ours operated on the boundaries of the US Constitution. And here it was in real life, just not being true at all. And I think that was one of the things that most shook me to my core, was just that truth that this was not a couple of bad apples in law enforcement. This really went up to the highest reaches of US government, almost in every single case I looked at. And so as depressing that is to think about, it's also something that really makes people understand today how much work needs to be done. And so with that, I will pass it on to Kyrie.
Thank you.
Kyrie, I'm sorry, Kyrie.
You're totally fine. So I am actually in the process of researching the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that occurred in South Africa after apartheid. So it's such interesting research, and I talked to Professor Agnihotri about it. We meet usually, and I always feel like there's something new that I can take from that. But it was interesting to kind of look at the perspective of what I found interesting from this work, and sort of maybe something I didn't realize occurred. But it was just something I was looking over today, just refreshing some of my research I've done over the past couple of weeks, and just seeing that they actually had a great limitation on a very narrow view, I should say, on their focus of human rights violations. And essentially that view was, we were looking at people that were violated in the physical sense and also death. And they stated there was a focus on mental states. However, I feel like there was such a deficit and not the complete picture being replicated here. Or not the complete picture was given during this whole commission process. So that's super interesting. A point that I had made whenever I'm just kind of recording some research and like my thoughts about it. But whenever we are approaching like thinking about restorative justice, I think that's so important to think, why give us the limited view? Are we really giving everyone that opportunity to say their truth if we're only limiting us to people that experience physical injuries or even death? So I feel like that's so important just to state, like, even if you said, oh, we talked about mental health in some sort of capacity, but what about the after effects of their families and things like that? So I just think that was an important point I wanted to make, was going through this process knowing that we have to have the complete picture, to be honest, and we can't have truth and reconciliation without everything given to us. So with that, I'll pass it to LaToya.
Thank you. And I think that's a great point. My unexpected truth is that people don't know what they don't know. So I think we want to believe that if people are those bad apples, if you will, that they're intentionally those bad apples, or if they are people being the recipients of the systemic issues that are in place, that they know it and that they just don't want to deal with it. And I think that what I have discovered is, while that may be the case for some, there are some people who just don't know what they don't know. And despite the systemic issues that have been created, I don't think that they are willing to face the truth, to know what they don't know. Because, hey, if I'm sitting right now in my comfort, why would I interrupt that? Like Professor Deleso said, if I have heard these stories, but I've never had to face it or experience it, why would I believe that that's the truth? Because deep down inside, I think it's horrible. I don't think that it's something that's positive. I wouldn't do it. So why would I believe that someone would do it? And I think that, if people would just remove their blinders, like we're saying things, the words that have been thrown around were, the whole idea of truth and reckoning, or truth and reconciliation. The piece of the puzzle that is missing is the truth factor. And that can be for multiple reasons. We can look at what's typically taught in the schools. I think about just the recent idea of Juneteenth and how many people didn't know about Juneteenth. And I'm not talking about white America. I'm talking about all Americans. There were so many people who wanted to know what was the big deal about Tulsa and Juneteenth. And it's because that is some history and some truth that, whether suppressed intentionally or not, just has not been taught to us. I think also what happens is, and I like the fact that Ibram Kendi has brought up the whole idea of anti-racist. I think so many people don't realize the need for a reckoning because they don't believe themselves to be racist, right? So when you hear the word racist, they're like, well, I'm not a racist. I have that friend of another color, or I love all people. I'm not a racist. That's not in my heart. And when we realize that it's beyond you just not being a racist, but you intentionally having to do something to be anti-racist, that makes a difference. So what I often hear people say is, I'm not a racist because I don't hate people, right? And to me, that's the easy way to escape, because saying that you don't hate someone simply is a scapegoat method for you, as opposed to you having to do something that requires action, right? So I don't hate someone requires nothing. I've declared that I don't hate people and I can move on. But if I declare that the opposite of hate should be love. And then the question is, well, what are you doing to show that love? And that is you having to explore truth, you having to have that reckoning. And I think when people get to that point, it's going to be a good time for all. And I'll be the first to admit, you know, maybe for different reasons, as a Black woman in America, we always say things like we're tired, we're exhausted, and we don't want to talk about it. And frankly, for the longest time, I was that person. And after hearing some of the things I've heard today, I realized that for me, my wake-up call was the killing of George Floyd. I live in Minneapolis. I live right down the street from where George Floyd was killed. I work at North Central University, and my job hosted the memorial that was here in Minneapolis. And it was just a wake-up call for me. And, you know, since then, I've jumped knee deep in, and I've written a book because I realized that it is not just about me. And I realized for the first time that being quiet is not quiet. It actually speaks volumes, right? And I don't want to be complicit. So it's for so many reasons. I'm like, you know, as a mother of 2 Black boys who will grow up to be Black men, I know that there's a time for us to make a change, and it has to happen now. And the final thing that I would say is, I think that when we talk about the Truth and Reckoning Commission that happened in South Africa post-apartheid, I think that is so critical, because one thing that we've never done here in America is that we've never had that. So we go from 1865, and then we jump right into Jim Crow, and then we get to 1965. And then I hate to say it, when I'm reading some of Dr. King's writings from the 60s, it is eerie to me how similar it is to 2020. And I think until we face it and we address it, we keep doing what we keep doing, we're gonna keep getting what we keep getting. So I'm just really encouraged by the unexpected truths that are causing people to want to step out and be bold about what's happening and what's not happening. And so with that, I pass it on to Jonnae.
Yes, every comment has been overwhelming. I see myself writing and kind of jittery now because I can't get it all out. One of the things that I've seen and that I really didn't realize until I became really deeply engrossed in it was maybe my second year in college. I began to realize that African Americans were brought here as commodity. And we're still commodities. I've kind of reflected on that and continue to reflect on that. In saying that, Latoya said something, Deleso said something that really resonated with me, in that one, people don't see, they may not see, they may be ignorant to what's happening with African Americans. And then others turn a blind eye and say, I don't want to see. One of those things is, one of the biggest things is that racism is so blatant now. It is so blatant. It's like it's sitting in front of us, it's slapping us in the face, and then we still turn our heads and say, oh, I don't see that. You know, I don't understand. And it's blatant. It's blatant. A man walks into a coffee shop, a Black man walks into a coffee shop, and then all of a sudden he's arrested. He's with other men and they're arrested. Blatant racism, you know, and then we turn a blind eye to it. And then also we've become so programmed, just programmed in being immune to these things and saying, none of us see it. Even Black people can say, when something happens and we hear it on TV, the first thing a lot of people think, not everybody, what did they do? What did they do? They had to have done something. And I hear this all the time. I did a study on the opioid crisis versus, just did a study on this. It's crazy. But on the opioid crisis versus the crack epidemic. Well, Latoya said something so important, and my heart just jumped because this was the bulk of my research. When it happens in African American communities, everybody is immune. Everybody says, oh, you know, they're terrible. They did this. They brought crack on themselves. They willingly took it. If everybody doesn't know, Medicaid has expanded. Medicaid began an expansion. With the opiate crisis, epidemic, whatever we want to call it, it has become a public health issue. Okay, now who does it affect? Mainly white males. White males are dying at an increasingly increased rate from the opiate epidemic. So here we go. That versus the individuals that they were taken from their homes, they died from crack usage, their families were destroyed, they were put in prison, some of them still in prison as of today, versus the opiate crisis, which now we did Medicaid expansion in order to decrease the individuals overdosing, and they can get treatment. They're even given treatment that is methadone, these different things. So I said all that to say this. Sometimes we don't want to see until it actually happens to us, and then we put a Band-Aid on it. We say, okay, you know what? Yeah, that happened to them. Let them take care of it, but not us. It's always when it happens to us that we come out and we say, yeah, now I want to do something with it. Now I want to change something. So yeah, I agree. One of those things that I saw in race is that we turn a blind eye, we're immune. Even some African Americans are immune to the struggles of other African Americans, and we have to change it. And you know, it's blatant, guys. It's sitting out there, and we just say, oh no, it can't be. No, nobody would be racist. This is, what year are we in? We're in 2020. That was a long time ago. But 400 years later, we're still commodities. We're still being shipped into the prison system. Prison is private now. So we're still being shipped in, shipped out, shipped back in to be used in every way. So that was that's what I saw as far as race relations are concerned. And I'm gonna pass it on to Shailly.
So when I was practicing in court, you know, when I met Tim, I remember just a few little incidents that were very striking. One was there was a police officer who was testifying, and my client was really sure that he did not possess whatever drug that they said he possessed. And the memo book entry was missing, and there was all this, like, there was something off, right? And I was questioning the lack of the entry about recovering the substance, and the judge actually called me up and said, Ms. Agnihotri, do you really believe the police officer's lying? And I'm like, yes, I do. And later on, we find out there were all these laboratory results that were forged in New York. There was a whole uncovering of the laboratories that were forging test results. So this is in New York City, so I don't want to hear about misjustices anywhere. We haven't even dealt with the most, you know, the so-called liberal place in America. So, and the fact that the judge was shocked that I would believe a police officer was lying was also the interesting part of that. And then the other thing I was thinking about when you guys were talking was, I had this like lovely life. That's where I met Gil, because our kids went to school together, where I was hanging out with liberal people in New York City and Manhattan, who all would claim to not have a racist bone in their body. And that also often people would say, we're in the post-Obama era. And I would want to laugh at them, because I'm like, do you want to come see who I represent in court? Do you want to see the 16-year-old kid that spent a night in jail because he had to go to school without a Metro pass, so he hopped a train and therefore he's spending a night in jail? Do you want to see the, you know, like the bifurcated worlds we've created, so that, and this is my thesis about this, that we have farmed out our racism to institutions, so we don't have to have a personal relationship to it. And that has been my experience in conversations with people, trying to talk to them about systematic racism, because people have no personal relationship to it. They can turn the eye, like exactly what you're saying, Professor Alford, till you hear the story from somebody that means something to you. And I would just want to, this is a reflection round, so we can all reflect on what we've heard. But I would just say, when you were speaking, minds can change, but my belief is the minds change when hearts open. And I think that young lady's heart opened to the suffering of somebody she had some relationship with. With that, I'll just pass it to Jonnae about reflecting on anything or amplifying anything you've heard.
I feel as if everything everyone's been saying is so powerful, and I think for us as individuals in this nation, we do have a duty once we become aware and once we understand, I guess, those alternate realities, which may not be something that we've been exposed to, but once we open our ears, and I think someone in my circle earlier said something about being wildly curious, the benefits of being wildly curious and actually asking questions and actually wanting to know about the experiences of other individuals is extremely important, because oftentimes we do just remain complacent and not knowing. And as Shailly said, having those systems being the ones responsible, so no one in particular can have the target on their back for being held responsible for what's going on. Everything that's been said reminded me of a quote that I also used in my circle experience. And it's by W.B. Du Bois. And he says, either America will destroy ignorance or ignorance will destroy the United States. And I feel like that is a powerful statement, because although I feel as if we're at an all-time high of awareness right now, at the same time, we have a bunch of individuals who remain ignorant and who are perfectly fine with just turning the other cheek and acting as if that has nothing to do with me. That's above me. This is a quote I'll use. That's above me now. So I feel like us starting these conversations and having these conversations is first step. And just continuing to spread the awareness to other individuals will just ensure that this conversation continues on a national level. And with that, I'll pass it to Deleso. Got it.
Just Deleso.
Sorry.
My mind was all over the place. See what you did, Miss Morris. Where do I want to begin? The vision that I had for next steps, or the vision that I would have for the community and the nation as a whole. Another quote that my grandmother had was, and I now understand it even more so. She used to say, you have to treat people like people. You have to treat people like people. And when I think about what we are experiencing right now, is that we're not treating people like people. The systemic racism that is just blatant, the institution, things are just happening. And when I think about George Floyd and seeing this police officer's knee on his neck in broad daylight, not hiding, people begging him to stop. George Floyd was not treated like people, like a person. And a person who witnessed that and didn't see that could have been their son, that person disassociates himself with the reality of racism. It can't be your son if you're not socially constructed like George Floyd. But that doesn't make George Floyd any less than a person. No person should have to undergo a knee on their neck for any reason. No person should rest that night or believe they're resting to go to work the next day and to be killed in their bed by a no-knock warrant. Not the facts, beyond the facts of there was some suspect, some drugs should have been, whatever the narrative is as to what supported or didn't support the no-knock warrant. It just shouldn't exist for a person to go to bed in their home and to be killed. That's people. That's treating people like people. People that hear that and see that and witness that and say, well, I don't live in that neighborhood, or I'm not associated with someone, or nobody would ever have a reason to no-knock warrant my home. My vision is that people, individuals as a society, begin to feel and see. I think that's, Shailly, what you said, your heart open. Mind can change, heart has to open, but you have to see this injustice like it's you and yours, not like it's them and theirs. Because as long as that happens, it's going to continue. I've heard people discuss that if this were happening to white males at the rate that it's happening to black males, something would be done. Well, we know that happened in opium versus crack. Something would be done. That's when people are looking at and treating individuals based on what they're not, where the power lies. Until we can get to that point of treating people like people, that's the vision, that no one should live with the level of stress that we live under. And it's not even stress because it's you. It's stress watching the television. It's stress reading the news. It's stress because of the kinship and affinity with the way you're born, socially constructed. Until individuals feel that it shouldn't happen, it's not going to change. And so my vision would be, and this is, I guess, what it helps me, is to say or to believe, what if decision makers or potential decision makers were exposed to alternate realities, and that exposure not only changed their mind, but it opened their heart, and then when they were in a decision-making position, attorney general, they would be able to make a decision based on their known reality. They don't have to be socially constructed like the person that's undergoing the injustice, but their reality is it exists. That would be my vision, to impact and it would have to be this next generation of decision makers, because we can see what the present decision makers are doing. They're telling us that Breonna Taylor, not that she was shot, not that she was killed, but that it just happened. But it's an attempt to murder. Everybody knows the story. My point is, the vision has to be for people to treat people like people. I didn't mean to go that long, sorry.
Because that hit me to my core, because we forget the history of the nation. They love to say that, oppression has existed for centuries. Slavery has existed in many different forms, but we forget that there's slavery, and then there's the American peculiar institution of chattel slavery, where we weren't seen as people. And to this day, we get to ask ourselves, are we seen as people? Because like you said, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, these stories, these young people, these people, just like you and me, aren't treated as such. And my vision, what I have written on my paper here, is a vision of collective security, of people working as if we're all members of this anthill, all working towards the same common goal of justice. And it brought me to a moment in my life when I was a Boy Scout. And as a Boy Scout, you have to be interviewed in order to advance in rank. And I was the only African-American Black person in my troop. Cerritos, California is somewhere where there's not many people who look like myself. And in that interview, you're supposed to be asked questions about your understanding of the principles of Boy Scouts. Do you understand why you should be this next rank? What did you do during this rank that makes you deserving of a new rank? But I didn't get asked these questions. I was asked if I have a father at home. I was asked, why don't you have a father at home? I was asked, why is your last name different than your mother's last name? Are you asking the other students these questions? I don't believe so. So my vision is probably along the same lines as yours. It's changed since what you said. And to paraphrase again, the emperor, the last emperor of Ethiopia, he has a famous speech, and I don't know it by heart, but he pretty much says that until the color of man's skin is no different than the color of your eyes, it's going to be a war. This war can be seen in many different ways. A war socially, a war within church, a war within any type of organization, because until we come together and we each have our own and hold our own embers of justice, and until we put our personal ember of that justice into a campfire, we can't see that flame of truth burn, nor can we see the justice come. I'm getting passionate, so I have to move on. But truly, that is my vision. The vision is progress as a group, collectively, because if we're together, we can call out those workers of iniquity outside of us and really see them. So as the Bible says, be strong and of good courage. I'm pass it on to Timothy.
So as I listen to all of you, I'm kind of reminded of some of the language we're using. Shailly started off by this bifurcated reality. Professor Alford said this alternative reality. I've heard disassociation. This is all our schizophrenic reality that Black folks have been forced to live in this mania. It's hard to do, right? Because that's our reality. Most people who don't experience the things we experience have no idea, clue. And you can't teach it, you can't tell it, you have to live it. And we have lived this schizophrenic life where we were told that if you pull yourself by your own bootstrap, even if you don't need boots, or if you get an education, keep your head down, you will succeed. And that's all been a lie. It's all been a lie, right? So when I talk about my children, I have 2 college-age children, this is why I'm so schizophrenic now, knowing what I know, because I went to HBCU, my experience with my parents. I know one set of reality because I've seen it. In a very real strange sense, I try to shelter my children from that because I'm educated, you know, I may be part of the middle class, they see part of that, but the reality is they're not divorced from those things that I'm afraid of. Whether it be the talk about with my son about cops, or not, or my daughter. You know, when my mother and father were growing up in the segregated South in the 30s and 40s, it was a matter of survival on a day-to-day basis. Their survival depended on what they said, how they acted, and what they did. So their reality was based on just that, living day to day. And it wasn't just cops. It could be a random white person who could cause you danger and harm. And so having that experience, knowing that history, and trying to achieve some measure of success, whether it's education or where it's, you know, a degree or whatever it is, we have to understand that that doesn't exempt us from all the horrors out there, whether it be police brutality, or now you have folks out there with their own guns, and you got folks, you know, kidnapping the mayor, the governor of Michigan. That stuff is reality. If folks, militia, terrorists, whatever you want to call them, can do that, or conspire and plan to kidnap a governor, what can they do? And so, living in this world, also another thing makes it schizophrenic, and I hate to keep on using these mental health terms because it's important to do so. We live through trauma and pain and depression. So I guess to be woke is to experience the ultimate trauma and pain and depression, because if you see what's going on, and my vision is to have 2020 and be truth, understand the truth and know the truth, that is so tiring. When you can live in both worlds, understand what's going on, protect yours, protect your family, and also understand the truth. It's no wonder we survive daily, but we survive as long as we have, because we're survivors. And It's going to take just a recognition of the truth. We spoke about truth and recognition. We can't have reconciliation without the truth. You're right. And we can have all the help we want from those who want to help us. But those people, if they want to be allies of the cause and the struggle and the activism, they have to acknowledge the truth. And so it's tough. It's tough. But the truth will set you free. So hopefully we can keep that in mind. Gilbert.
Well, thanks, Tim. I think I really want to build on something you were just talking about, which is how painful it is and the trauma. And I think one of the things that, you know, I can confess to growing up reading in textbooks and just having no real sense of American history. I think the history that we've been fed has been whitewashed in a really big way. And one of the things, sometimes I go out and do talks at universities or wherever, and one of the things I'll do with my slideshow is show those images of, you know, those iconic images that we associate with the Jim Crow South, which is, you know, the separate water fountains, the separate entrances, the Jim Crow balcony in the theater. And I think sometimes when I read those in the textbooks and how children are taught about post-slavery, it's almost like we have this narrative, well, yes, we have this slavery problem way back many years ago, but then the great Abe Lincoln came along and we fixed that. And now, you know, 100 years went by and then, you know, Martin Luther King came along and we had some civil rights. What happened in those 100 years that we don't want to talk about? And the truth of the matter is, when slavery ended, a lot of things got really, really worse in a lot of ways. Slavery really, if you look at it, was a situation where you had wealthy white people protecting their assets and actual slaves had value. The end of slavery presented the beginning of the mass incarceration, where African-American lives just didn't have that kind of value anymore. And so that, when I look back at those images of like the separate water fountains, that to me does nothing but whitewash history. It makes it seem like what we've experienced in this country was rude or impolite, when in fact the words I would use to describe what I was seeing is not going to be rude and impolite. It's going to be brutality and terrorism. And so how do you get over that as a nation without acknowledging that? I'll sometimes go into communities in the South and talk to people about cases that happened in their backyard in their lifetime, and they have no idea of this. It wasn't talked about. Well, I could almost imagine why that would be in the white community, because there'd be a great source of shame. But it was also happening in the African-American communities, because why would you really want to poison your children with these stories of just racism and brutality and terrorism? You're trying to protect your children. And so I found a lot of African-Americans that I speak with, they didn't know any of this stuff. Some of it involved their own relatives. And it gets back to that trauma that you mentioned. And sometimes I think of Ta-Nehisi's Coates' quote about the end of slavery was like a knife, and it was pulled out of the back. And almost as if we're saying, there, you don't have an injury anymore. We pulled the knife out. Well, do you not expect there to be all of these other injuries, internal and such, that are not the legacy of slavery? And that's exactly what it is. It's this injury and this trauma that we've never addressed. We just try to say that, well, slavery's over, let's move on to the next thing. And you know, sure enough, Martin Luther King comes along 100 years later and some civil rights. We need to talk about what has happened in this country at the end of slavery, after Emancipation Proclamation. What was happening in this country? Because that's the legacy that African-American communities have had to live with for decades and decades. And I believe a lot of white people like to turn their back on that and not talk about it, because it's so painful to them as Americans, as people who believe they're patriotic Americans. They don't want to address this. They don't want to acknowledge it, because it's a painful recognition that your country has done something so hurtful and continues to do something that's extraordinarily hurtful by not recognizing and understanding the past.
That's a lot to reflect on. Well, some of my initial thoughts actually was the quote Jonnae had shared, and it really like piqued my interest. And just like quickly thinking about it, I personally feel that we're going through a period of time of ignorance and continuous ignorance that we're seeing displayed by individuals, by public officials, what may or may not be. But I feel like it is overcoming us at this point in time. Yet I also think back on and reflect on what's happening by my current generation and people also younger than me, and how motivated I also feel at the same time. So it was so crazy. Literally, like a couple of weeks ago, one of my aunts had called me like out of the blue, and she was just like, I just wanted to let you know that, like, you know, I'm so proud of, like, of course my family's very proud of me to being in law school and like the ideals and things that I would like to do and accomplish once I become an attorney. But I think it was interesting because she was randomly calls and just was like, I'm so motivated. And because she's obviously much older than me, she's one of my great aunts, but she was just stating that she just watching the news and watching everything that's going on, these are things that she lived through and that we're still continuously live through. But she was just like, it's so nice to see that your generation, even people younger than you, are doing so much now, and how impactful that was on her, someone so much older than me. I think it was to the point where I almost saw it to the fact that she accepted what was happening as like, this is just what's normal. This is a sense of normalcy that she always had, and kind of seeing how impactful that was on her, and that was definitely impactful on me as well. So I just want to kind of put that as a positive outlook on this conversation as well, that we're going through terrible, terrible times, and this is something that we've seen before. And it's honestly like, I'll look back at things that I've seen, and even whenever I took Professor Agnihotri's class over the summer and we were talking about LA riots, and literally how I was like, this is exactly what's going on right now. And that was in 1992, and we're in 2020. It's the exact same thing. And it was so crazy seeing that now, years later. But I still see a difference, and I see a difference in the people that are wanting to institute change. And I think that's what's so positive about having conversations with a group of individuals today, but also not only sitting on a panel, listening to panels, but seeing people out and actively protesting, peacefully protesting, despite what the media might state. And I think that's just something that we can take and continue to motivate one another as well. So I'll pass it to LaToya.
Thank you so much. And before I share my vision / reflection, I feel like, address the last two speakers right before me. I think you make a great point, Ms. Jackson, when you talk about just the change, and I'm happy that you were able to reflect on the difference that your grandmother is seeing. Even though I can say I think it's so similar to the 1960s, and you just made the comparison to 1992, I think one thing that we have now that wasn't present in the 60s or in 92 was the internet, and just the connectivity, and just the fact that we have our cell phones, the fact that George Floyd's murder was recorded on a camera and it went viral immediately. And I think that that is a big change maker for us. No longer do we have to wait for it to hit the news, and we see it in black and white from the perspective of the media-driven perspective. We can see it from multiple different vantage points. We can share it, post it, like it, comments on it. And I think that that is truly making a difference for us. I also want to respond to something that you said, Gilbert, when you said, of course, when we were chattel slaves, I've had someone to tell me before, you shouldn't say we. Yes, I am going to say we, because that's my history, and whether or not there's other things mixed in it, somewhere it's a we. So, the idea is, of course, we were more valuable when we were property at that point. But I don't think that, I think you made a comment that after the slavery ended, we were no longer valuable. And I think that we were no longer valuable as free people. So that's the whole, hence the 13th Amendment and the whole loophole of the slavery being able to take place, like Ava DuVernay so eloquently pointed out. It takes place now just in another form. So yes, there's still value there. It's just shifted a little bit. And I think also one other point that I just want to touch on is the whole idea of how many of our people don't know history. And when I say our people, I mean Americans in general. We just don't know all of the history. And I think about, I have a 6-year-old little boy, and as much as I could have wanted to shield him, this summer I couldn't. Everywhere we went, it was George Floyd. Like, the ones you guys see on the news is not even nearly what's present around Minneapolis. So we had this whole idea where we decided to take him to a protest. And I'll admit I didn't want to do it. As Mama Bear, I did not want to do it. But the protest was like 5 blocks away from our home. And it was just a wake-up call to me that, do I want to be the one to tell him, or do I want the streets to tell him? Because as Tim pointed out, eventually I'm going to have that talk with him. So whether I prolong it until he's 16 or do it when he's 6, the talk is going to have to happen. And I would rather be the one to be able to do it and put it in front of his face right now. So just to segue into what I believe my vision is, it's been said a few times on the call, I think that it's gonna take a change of hearts and minds of people. And until we can get to that place, we're gonna find this cyclical thing that just keeps happening. And one thing that I have to accept is the fact that even if I have a discussion with someone and I'm throwing the towel and I just don't think this person is gonna change, I have to believe that I might plant the seed and someone else is gonna come behind me and water it. And I believe that what you water will grow. So while I may be the planner and that might be my job with that person, I rest in knowing that, you know, it's a process for people and it doesn't happen at the same time for everyone. My favorite scripture is the proverb, the whole guard your heart with all due diligence, because it's the spring well of life. And I believe that to be the case. And so I believe that this has to start with hearts and minds. I'll say, like I said a little bit earlier, I was inspired to write a book after the killing of George Floyd. And it was inspired by not just him being killed, but I kept getting questions from colleagues, students, friends. I'm in Minneapolis, friends from Louisiana, I'm from Louisiana, asking me questions of what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And that let me know that there's a change that needs to be made and people know that. And so the answer I kept saying was, first you need to examine your heart. You need to figure out if there's something that's not pure in you, and then you have to go ahead and address that head on, and then you have to listen and you have to learn. And then the follow-up question you get from people is, well, what can I read? I tell people, look, no matter how you want to learn, there are so many resources out there. There are TED Talks, there are podcasts, there are books, there's webinars, conferences, whatever it is you want, you're able to get it. We have an abundance of information at our fingertips. So I think that for me, my final reflection when it comes to this is, in a perfect world, I would say in my lifetime, I'm gonna see this system be dismantled. But I don't believe, if I'm honest, I don't believe that I am gonna see racism be completely eradicated. But I believe that the system is gonna continue to be broken down. So I do believe that there's gonna be progress and that every generation should get better. And I sincerely believe that what the systems are today, that in 20 years, they're gonna be better. In 40 years, they're gonna be better. And it's a process, and we just have to keep on pushing and building to it. And then the final thing that I'll say is, I think when we talk about having these conversations and these courageous conversations, we have to be ready to know that there's going to be follow-up questions and us not get defensive or offensive about questions that might come. So somebody said it on the call, I think it was Shailly made the comment about someone making a comment of us being in the post-Obama era, and that, you know, they want to believe that because we've had a Black president that we're post-racial. One of the things I've done is I've tried to address questions that I've gotten. So in addition to what can I do, you get the questions like, well, why can't I say all lives matter? Or, well, I don't see color. Or, you know, we are post-racial. We had a Black president, Black people have good jobs and increasing levels of education. And to that, I say the very example of Breonna Taylor being killed in her home shows that that's not the case. The very example that we've already talked about of the different treatment of the crack cocaine versus the opioids, it lets me know that we are not post-racial and there's so much work to be done, but I'm hopeful because I see changes taking place. And with that, I pass it to Janara.
Yes, I think as a reflection, one of the things that we have to do is we do have to live our truth, but we also have to understand that the truth is that we're all victims of this racial tension, racism, slavery. We're all victims. We're so many generations removed, but we're still all victims. We have to stop. And one thing Gilbert said, he said the knife was put in our backs, pulled out, and we still have these wounds. That is so true, but I don't think the knife was ever pulled out. I think the knife was just pushed in deeper. I think it's just going in deeper and deeper and deeper, and it's changed. Slavery still exists. I tell all my students, go look at your Constitution. Slavery's still there. It's still in there. It says you can be enslaved as long as you're a prisoner. And how do we get these prisoners, and who are the majority of these prisoners? So we still have this system of slavery, and we're still victims of it. But I also think that people that don't understand racism from all levels, whatever it is, I also feel like they're victims as well, because they've been raised to believe a certain thing and it's a lie. And when, you know, it's almost like someone taking you, and they take you away from your parents and they raise you as their child, and they give you these, they always tell you, okay, you're my daughter, or you're my son. And 30 years later, you find out, I never was born. You weren't my parent. You're not my parent at all. And then you go to your real parents and you realize, oh my goodness, you know, all of this was hidden from me. So it's almost like people that are ignorant to racism, they're also being victimized as well by whoever's teaching them these different things. And then also, we're victims in that we label in gender and race and sexual orientation and age and economics, education, the stereotypes. We're all of this, all of these labels, just all they do is just make it worse for everybody, and we all know that. But one thing that we really have to do is understand that based on all of this, we're all victims to it, and we have to stop being victims of it. I have a cousin that she would talk to me all the time about going to a plantation. She was like, you need to go to a plantation. You just need to see, blah, 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 blah. And this cousin is white. So she's like, yeah, you just need to go. And I was very polite with her, love her to death. I love her to death. Very polite with her. I'm like, nah, I don't think that's my thing. I wouldn't go, you know. And she's finally one day she texts me and she says, hey, look, you're going to go look at this advertisement for this plantation in Louisiana. And they say they don't celebrate anything. They won't allow weddings there, blah, blah, blah. And I go, cousin, listen, this is almost like asking a rape victim's family to visit the place where this person was raped for $39.95 and basically learn the history of them being victimized. And then she understood it. She could see it from that standpoint. So those are things that we have to understand. We have to understand the victims. We have to understand that we're being victimized as well. And we have to stop the labels. One of my favorite songs is a song by The Roots. And the singer says, it ain't fair. It's hard when you're looking for love and it ain't there. And then he talks about your protector being your predator. When your protector becomes your predator, which always, I listen to that song and I get chills all the time, because I'm like, this is what we're living. We're living with police officers, the justice system, attorneys. We're living with husbands, wives, and these people are supposed to be our parents. Some of our parents, they're supposed to be our protectors, and they've become our predators. They prey on us. So in the government, we believe in the government so much, and we think the government is there to take care of us. And I tell people all the time, my students as well, we are the government. You know, we make up the government. We influence public policy. We influence the laws that are made. We interpret the laws. We enact the laws. We enforce the laws. We are the people that do this. So it's very scary to me that, you know, we scream, we need this change and we need this change. We are the change. We are the change. So we have to see it and live our truth and go from there. And I pass to Shailly.
So I have this thesis that we need restorative justice as a community-based model to have these type of conversations, because we need structures and space for them. Because because I do believe in the power of storytelling to open hearts. And I do believe that structures can move energies in particular ways. And I do believe that we cannot enter this conversation as a debate, because I think that doesn't open hearts. So my thesis is that that the antidote to the divide and conquer model that we have been living under, all of us, because we're all being divided from each other and from our own power, that the antidote for that is a process like what I believe restorative justice to hold. So I guess I would like to just hear your thoughts on the potential for restorative justice to facilitate these kind of conversations, what you want to see as a structure to sort of address what's going on. Because we've all made some kind of very powerful statements of the fact that perhaps the institutions are beyond reform, because I think we're all tired of Band-Aids being stuck on wounds, deep gaping wounds. So if the institutions are beyond reform, then what are we creating in its stead? And so that was a question I asked myself when I started doing this work. So I'm just wondering, I would love to hear everybody's reflection on it. Jonnae.
Restorative justice to me, basically, as you said, Shailly, would be allowing individuals of the community, those who are most impacted by the laws and the regulations that are put into place, to have a voice in a judgment-free community, and allow them to be a part of the conversations that are taking place for changes. It means having those tough conversations, despite how tough they may be. The ones that are structured around race relations, in particular right now. Accepting the truths that are expressed by individuals, and knowing that although someone's truth may not be your reality, that does not mean that their truth isn't accurate. And I feel like truly opening the wounds and cleansing the wounds would be the first step through restorative justice. And I feel like the restorative justice model basically encourages individuals to explore their individualities and share their experiences with others, not only for their own benefit, but for others' benefits as well. So that being said, I just feel like particularly in St. Louis, restorative justice could be something super amazing that allows people like my cousin and other African Americans who are being targeted in our community to be able to be in a space where they can share their fears and they can share their concerns about people of power. And in turn, I believe that police forces can begin to address true community needs and maintain public safety versus acting as a collection agency, or looking to generate citations and charges versus actually getting to the root of what may be the problems in the community. And I will pass it to Deleso.
Thank you. I see restorative justice as a necessary model to have this safe place, this venue, if you will, for people who need to hear each other's stories. I think that we're currently living in a time in which we don't validate another's story, another's reality. And I think if restorative justice was put in place with the understanding that you may not have gone through what I've gone through, but that does not mean that I'm not going through it. And I think that it's just so important that people hear each other's stories. And I've been in situations in which you may think about something differently, but you think about it differently because of your frame of reference. It's the willingness and opening of the heart that one could hear somebody else's story and then be able to put it together with the reality of whatever the institution is doing. And I think that just having that model, that necessary safe venue, that necessary space in which people can share their truths and not be discounted because of it disagrees with someone else in the grand scheme of things. I'll pass it on to Charles.
Yeah, so restorative justice to me involves reviving morality, because in my opinion, the word morality, what we conceive it as, has been dead in this country for a long time. So to me, restorative justice would be restoring that morality back into our legal system. And it entails us as a people revisiting the very definition of justice so that we have a clear mind without any blurred illusion as to what justice is. So especially me at a grass level root, at a community standpoint, being a student here at a historically Black institution, restorative justice would be making these circles with faculty advisors, with staff, with my peers, different organizations, and seeing the root, the very seed of the injustices happening on campus, and then taking it from there and moving it into Baton Rouge from a parish level, and then from a parish level to the state, you know what I mean? So it's a gradual progress. And I want to also point out, we have a question in the Q&A section from Mr. Jose, and he says, are restorative justice and community justice interchangeable terms? If not, how do they differ? And in my opinion, I'm not as educated on the different terms around justice in that way, but I would say, based off what the words mean, that they are interchangeable, because justice is justice, truth is truth, and a community is a community. And you can always sit down in a circle, and you can always listen and practice storytelling and actually understand the perspective of your brother man and understanding why they went through this experience. Just like how Mr. Deleso said, just because you did not go through it doesn't mean I did not go through it. And I think that's what restorative justice is to me. Shailly, I believe, will add on this question to the circle. Timothy.
So for me, restorative justice really means reimagining and re-envisioning the idea of justice. Right now, it's so one-sided. We talk about law and order. Order means control, oppression, subjugation. It means oppression on so many different levels. I like to have, I'm all for law. I'm a lawyer, and I believe in laws, but I also believe in access to justice. It's an access to justice, something different in order. Because right now, people who are arrested and go through the system, their access to justice is cut off because that's what the people in power want. They don't want people to have access to justice. They want people to be told what to do, go where they want them to go, do what they want them to do, take this plea, take this bail, go to jail. And so if you give people access in a meaningful, in a truly meaningful way that allows them to be heard, have their stories told, have a fair arbiter to hear those stories, there will be punishment, but that punishment must be fair. And also, when I speak of reimagining the way things are now, and people talk about defund the police, we're really talking about, and just moving the resources around so everyone has that access. It could be something simple now. One of the things we see now, and we've seen it all over, with the Pride family in Rochester. Mr. Pride was in mental health distress, and the police came and they basically treated him like as if he had committed a crime by putting a spit hood over his head and then allowing him to suffocate or have a heart attack. If we just reimagining that interaction with the police, instead of calling the police or call a social worker or have a police escort social workers to the scene where they could de-escalate that interaction, that whole situation would have been so much different. And this is doable. You're not taking any more power away from the police in that instance. You're just giving them another tool in the tool belt to de-escalate, and more importantly, help another human being without that law and order mentality. So it's possible. And I think what we're doing here now by having these discussions is really showing the different ways that all this is possible. And certainly through circles, the community interactions, just through our engagement as activists, we can show people that this is possible. For over, 400 years, we've been doing the law and order thing, and it hasn't worked. And so we have to reimagine and re-envision what our legal institutions look like. And it starts with the person, and it starts with humanity. Gilbert.
Yeah, I'll just talk a little bit about restorative justice a slightly different way by building again on something Tim just talked about, the importance of storytelling. And I had a book that came out in 2012, and it got a lot of attention down in Florida because it was based on the case of 4 wrongly accused African Americans of rape. And it was a horrible story about how they were treated in the justice system and by law enforcement. And a couple years later, one of the state legislature was having a book club, and all the Democrats started reading it. And they decided what they were going to do was try to do a claims bill to do some kind of relief, pardons, exonerations, apologies for these particular defendants who are called the Groveland Boys. But something really interesting happened in the process of that. The Republicans were also reading the book in their club, and they said that they were going to have a competition with the Democrats to see who could get more co-sponsors for the bill. And this is something that was unimaginable to me while I was working on this, but all of a sudden there was this competition between Democrats and Republicans to see who could get more co-sponsors for the bill to go forward with these pardons. And so they did this. I went down to Tallahassee, I was with the families, and they all turned around and they said, the Speaker of the House rose and said, we understand that it was a competition. We don't know what the final count was. Let's just do it now. And they all rose, and it was unanimous, 117 to nothing. All of the legislators stood up, put their hand on the heart, faced the families, and said, on behalf of the state of Florida, we apologize for this injustice. And they posthumously pardoned the Groveland Boys for this offense, and the exoneration is now in the works. And I remember people would ask me, like, what? All of those defendants are dead now. What does that really mean? A pardon? It came 70 years too late. And I remember the families, the ones that would answer this question, they said it means the world to us because our names were restored. We had to live down here under the shame of this narrative that was never ours. It was never truthful. It was always law enforcement and criminal justice narrative that our relatives were guilty. And we knew that wasn't the case. And it came 70 years later. Why is it important? I think it's because the state of Florida, and this is all states really, they need to acknowledge past injustices, because if you are going to represent that your state has integrity in the criminal justice system, you can't sweep these stories under the rug. And if you're not acknowledging the past, then the present has no hope. And I think that was a moment of restorative justice, because it was an acknowledgement that these racial atrocities were happening and they needed to be accounted for. And granted, nobody's lives got returned to them. These families are never going to experience the joy of seeing their loved ones again, because several of them were killed and the other one passed away after a long prison term. But the importance was it was done, and it meant something to the families, and it means something to the integrity and the credibility of the criminal justice system. And so I think that they need to also acknowledge some of these past injustices as a way of moving forward and saying we take credibility and integrity in our court system seriously. And I'll pass to Kyrie.
This is such an interesting, I'm glad to reflect on everything that everyone has stated. One thing that I think very consciously about is that this country was not made for me. This country was not, the way this country was built, the way that this country was founded was not to serve me, or my people or my family or people that look like me. So that's something I think about a lot, especially having conversations like this about restorative justice and what we can do and what we would want to do to advance this conversation. And I just, amongst my peers as well, that's something I always want to make known or make it a prevalent part of the conversation, is that this country was not meant, it's essentially the system is doing exactly what it was meant to do, which was not to serve Black individuals, people of color at all. So I think ultimately moving forward, I think that restorative justice is more than forgiveness. And that's something that I also have continuously pointed out while researching the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that happened in South Africa after apartheid. It seems as though a lot of their decision-making almost was if we forgive you type of conversations. And whenever they were holding these different organizations that occurred after. So I just want to make it known that we have to acknowledge that this is a much broader topic than we forgive you. This is something more of, we need to introduce our own truths, and accepting that truth is what's going to actually get us to that next step, which is something that people have continuously to reiterate during this conversation, which I definitely appreciate. We need to be able to have that opportunity to tell our story, but those stories also have to truthfully be heard. And I think listening to Professor Alford tell that story about students in her course, that was so eye-opening to me. And I feel like that was just another motivating factor of this can actually happen. People's minds and their ideals about restorative justice or just injustices in our country can actually be shifted, and they can put themselves in those situations if they truly want to. So I think that's just something that we can take from it. Overall, I think this whole process is going to also entail total reconstruction of our current government processes and system as well. And I am totally down I'm down to be a part of that task. I think that's something that definitely has to occur. And I just want to definitely leave everyone noting that we can't just state that this is going to occur overnight. And I know that's something that I'm assuming everyone is aware of, but that we can see change, and we have seen change in little small processes. And yes, it can be very defeating to see things that continuously reoccur. But I honestly feel that a group of individuals here today, anyone listening, can definitely be a part of this whole process as well. So I'm going to pass it to LaToya.
Thank you so much for that. So to me, restorative justice means hope, civility, humanity, like those very basic things. And I think that it's important for us to pay attention to the power of storytelling. I think that when there's a story to go along with something, it adds so much more context. It allows you to feel it. It allows you to remember it. It allows you to embrace it. Like I said, the storytelling, I like the example that Professor Alford gave. It sometimes is what it takes to change the hearts and minds. But also, I think what people typically assume restorative justice means or relates to is just the criminal justice system. So people think, well, how can this be useful for us just collectively if there's not a crime committed? And I like to see it as it's something that can be used for anything that has been broken, right? And with that, I think that that means every single one of us in America can use it. Janera made the comment that, you know, we've all been victims essentially to what has happened in the past. And I think, you know, when we know more and we have that obligation to do more, when we choose to be quiet, that makes us complicit. But I think that we've all been victims, sure. I think we've all been broken, yes. I think we all need rehabilitation and restoration, whether we see it that way or not. What I think of is the 1963 16th Street bombing example, when those 4 little girls lost their lives. And it was the day after that bombing, and there was a sermon, I'm going to call it a sermon, but it was a message that was spoken, and the rhetorical questions were asked of who threw the bomb. Who threw the bomb? And his question was it a Negro? Was it a white person? Who threw the bomb? And then he said, you know what? We've all thrown the bomb. And that's how I feel about us in general as we talk about this topic, whether we're quiet, whether we're loud, there's always more that can be done. So I feel that in that case, we all can use restorative justice, we all can use rehabilitation, we all can use restoration. If you're a person who feels that that doesn't apply to you, I will say if you've been defensive about any of these topics, if you've been offensive about any of these topics, or if you've had a level of discomfort about any of these topics, I think it confirms my feelings that we all have been broken in some way, and that we all can use the restoration that can be brought forward through restorative justice. And with that, I'll pass it to Jonnae.
Yes, I've gone through this process. The first time I went through the process, I was leery. I was very, very leery. And I was like, what is this? I have a 12-year-old daughter, and she always says, oh my God, these are feelings. You know, I don't want to have feelings. So it was feelings to me, to go through the complete process and listen to everyone's story. Latoya, I agree with you so much. And Professor Alford, it hits you in your heart when you hear the story. Just like when Professor Alford basically was talking about the knee on the neck. And I was completely emotional because I have a 15-year-old son who is 6'4", 200 and something pounds, and I could imagine a knee on his neck. I would die. I would die. I mean, I just couldn't even imagine it. So it allows this empathy and sympathy, restorative justice. It allows education, and something that we don't need. Something that we need. It allows this communication, which is key to relationships. If you want a marriage to work, if you want a parent-child relationship to work, if you want a co-worker relationship to work, there must be communication. And that's something that we're lacking so much of. We don't communicate. We don't tell each other's story. Yeah, you heard about slavery. We beat you, we raped you, we did this to you, we took your kids away from you, we brought you over on a boat, some of you jumped off. And I mean, it's just, you're immune to it. You know it now. But to experience it and hear someone say, like I read a story about a young lady and her mother. This was in the late 70s. They were still sharecroppers. And so this young lady and her mother, and I don't know if it was with restorative justice that I heard this story, but they were raped side by side. The guy that owned them, basically owned them, they didn't even know slavery was over. And so they had lived on this property for so long, and they were tied to this property because they could never make the payments. So the slave owner would come in and he would rape the mother and the daughter side by side. And I mean, I could just, it drives me nuts. And to hear other stories about other people of victimization and just women in general being hurt and men being hurt, children being hurt, it offers that. This is what restorative justice offers. It offers us to open our hearts, like you said. It offers us to see other people's story with this communication. Another thing that's very important, we get here and we all speak and there's no judgment. I think that's one of the reasons nobody wants to ever say anything or ever talk, because you feel as if you're going to be judged. I can't tell my story because I feel like you're going to say, oh my God, she's weak, she's whining like a girl, or whatever it is. There's no judgment with restorative justice. There's just correction. So I hear your story and I correct my mind and say, well, okay, I can now hear it. I can see it. I can hear it. And so I've corrected myself as self-correction. I heard Ari, who is one of the circle leaders today, this young girl, she just touched me today because she was talking about where she comes from and what she's used to, and what labels people have put on her and told her what she could and couldn't be. Restorative justice offers her an avenue where people can come together and say, no, I came from that same background. I did the same thing, and look at where I am. You can do it. So it offers that. It offers something that we've never had before other than counseling. it offers us healing from trauma. I was talking to Shailly the other day, and I was like, Shailly, look, when I got off of that call, I cried. I'm not gonna lie, I cried. I cried the first circle we had, but the trauma that I felt that I've experienced as an African American woman, I felt it leave. It was gone. That anxiety was gone because I share with these total strangers who I don't have to see anymore, other than Jonnae, because she's one of my students, and Professor Alford, one of my workers. But I don't have to see anybody anymore. But they left with this piece of me that I gave them, and now it's with them. I've passed it on to them to use in a good way. So it's almost like taking pain that you have and giving it to someone else, but they use it in the proper way. So it's transitioning a negative to a positive. So that's what restorative justice was for me. And I really thank Shailly for doing this. But something else I heard in the last roundtable, which I got really emotional. I cannot remember the young man's name, but he's a dean of students, and he said he was the dean of students, and he was continuously, like his first year, he was like, I was horrible. I didn't even know I was horrible because I was sending all these kids, suspending them and doing all this. And he said, finally, I got with Shailly and I started talking to these kids. We did a circle, and the kids started telling what was going on. And it made me emotional because we do it with 2-year-old children. 2-year-old children, they're having a temper tantrum. We say, hey, stop. What's going on? Do you need a cookie? Do you need a drink? Do you need a TT? What is it that you need to do? But we're just bigger kids. We're bigger 2-year-olds. That's all we are, with minds and books we can read, and we can operate computers and cars. So we're just these big children that have been, raised up, and we have these problems. And instead of someone coming to us and saying, hey, Janara, why are you upset today? What's wrong? We say, no, you shouldn't act like that. You shouldn't come to work this way. You should always be, why, give me a cookie. I might need a cookie one day, So I think restorative justice does that for us. It offers us that avenue where we can get rid of everything that we have, and we can pass it over to someone else to use in a positive manner. So that's what I got from it. And I'll pass it to Shailly.
Thank you, guys. Charles, do you have a quote or a lyric you can close this roundtable out with, and then we can go to any questions and answers after we close out?
Definitely. And what comes to mind immediately is a lyric from one of my own songs called Pure Nazi, and it says, I keep on moving, no time for bluesing. I'm on the move, I'm in the groove. I'm flying high in the sky. Whoa, this is life. I'm a butterfly. And that's just a reminder that keep on moving. We can't allow these small pitfalls and these little tribulations to shake our cause and what we're doing in this life, and that's the cause of justice.
Thank you all, beautiful panelists. I don't want this to end. I'm just loving this conversation so profoundly. Charles is going to moderate questions from the audience. If anybody has any questions, I'll stick around, and whoever is able to, please stand by.
Yeah, so we have a question from Jaden. And they say, what is the best way to facilitate conversations involving restorative justice with a younger audience? You have all been so amazing. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us. And yes, Ms. Flora.
Thank you. I actually thought I could have typed the answer. So when I saw it, I responded to try to type it. So thank you so much, Jaden, for the question, and as well as the compliment to us. It's been a pleasure, and thank you, Shailly, for this opportunity as well. I think the best way to do it is to meet them where they are, right? And so what I mean by meet them where they are is if they are 10, let's say they're 13, remember that it's a 13-year-old audience. So make appropriate questions, maybe start with questions that would pique their interest and don't just jump right into the depth. When I hear Professor Jonnae speak, I'm actually a SULC alum also. And when I was in law school at Southern, one of my classmates, she started an organization called LACE. And it was an institute for young girls in Baton Rouge. And I had a moment with those young girls that stuck out to me. It was Professor Shaniqua Gray, who's still there. And we had an event for the girls at her home. And these girls were, they were junior high school girls who looked like me. And I had a moment, I had an aha moment when they were playing old school New Orleans rap music. I'm from Southern Louisiana. And I said to them, how do you guys know these songs? And I said it like that, like, how do you guys know these songs? And they looked at me and they were like, how do you know these songs? And so then one of the girls said to me, she was like, you don't know this music? And then she said, you probably have a mama and a daddy who raised you. And in that moment, I was broken because I said to her and to the rest of the girls, I felt like all of the work I had done with them wasn't what it could have been because they saw me and they didn't see me as something that they could be. They saw it as, well, that's for the girls over there, not me. So I had to tell them, I am you and you're me. My parents were teenage parents. And so I realized in that moment, I had to meet them where they were. And that's something that has stuck with me no matter what group I'm talking to, working with. I'm a college professor right now also. And my biggest thing is you meet them where they are. So that long answer to answer your question, Jaden, you start with meeting them where they are.
I just want to add, thank you. I just want to add that our teens, what we realized when we started working in the high school in the South Bronx, is that if we really wanted a grassroots process within the school system, originally I went and ran circles there, that if we really wanted the young people to own it, they had to be the leaders of the circle. So they became our teen leaders. And they now, so in our model, we give the model to the young person to run the circles because we believe that our resumes have no bearing on our efficiency or efficacy to run circles and community circles. And we have a very specific structure, but within the structure, the prompts are prompted, the prompts are made by the circle keeper to reflect the circumstances. But what I'm trying to say is that I think that the young people can actually own this process very much and run them. And they now are true leaders, the young people that we started working with in the South Bronx. And when the TRC was given accreditation to teach lawyers in New York State, they co-taught lawyers with me because I thought a 16-year-old teaching a 45-year-old lawyer is the best way to teach the lawyer that his resume means nothing. Listen to the young person. And I love intergenerational circles too, and I really want to advocate for them every chance you get. As you can see, the wisdom of the young people is what we need to hear because we've sure messed up this world. So, and also somebody also, I'm sorry, I just had a note somebody was talking about the intergenerational stories from their grandmother. And like, if we don't have these intergenerational stories, we also have wisdom to impart to the young people. They have no opportunity to hear it. We also have things to learn from them. And so this intergenerational circle, I would really advocate for. Other people have questions that are in the...
Yes, and
Okay.
Before I move on to the next question, I think a great way to facilitate restorative justice with young people is twofold. It's through art and through understanding. I say art because art's universal, because when we're talking about young people, we have to understand that even kindergartners can be sitting in circles and doing things. So they may not understand these big words that we use. So making a song or drawing a picture would be a great way to facilitate restorative justice. And I say understanding because we also have to realize that we live in this age of information. To our being young, and we all know how young people are, we're very closed-minded. We think we know everything. We're very blind. Not a lot of people come with this Socratic level of thinking. So understanding, because we have to have patience with them. And patience, when I say them, I'm talking about myself. I'm young myself, and I know I slip into moments of closed-mindedness, like, what are you talking about? What? No, I feel dispassionately about this, and I know that I gotta sit down and really open myself. So I believe art and understanding would be a great way to facilitate restorative justice. And before I move on to these other questions, is that it for that question? Yes, all right.
And
so,
thank panelists from Roundtable 1 have joined us now too, so thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Welcome everybody. And so I don't want to mess up your name. Almitra Gasper asks, public health was mentioned in regards to the opioid epidemic, and given how COVID-19 has impacted the planet, how do we see restorative justice practices as an approach to public health?
Ms. Jonnae, did you have any thoughts on that since you just researched public health?
Wait, so it says public health was mentioned in regards to the opioid epidemic, and given how COVID has impacted, how do we see restorative justice practices as an approach to public health? I think with public health, I think one of the things with my research is we can talk about the health in the Black community versus the white community, and the type of treatment that African Americans, people, minorities in general, not just African Americans, are getting is it's disparate. It's different. It's completely different. I think restorative justice can help in that way, in that it can bring to the table education on what we're facing within minority communities versus what we're facing in non-minority communities, and then opening the floodgates for understanding of what is needed to get us to a healthy level. One of the issues that we definitely face within minority communities are the food deserts. We have, we don't have proper, in all of them, we don't have proper nutrition. I live in a majority Black neighborhood, and to get something to eat around here and something that is nutritious, you have to drive into the city. There's nothing here, or you have to grow your own food, which I do. So, so I think restorative justice in that way can open up the minds of people, get them to understand that there are issues that we're dealing with. Food determines health. The substances you put in your body determines your health. The exercise that you get determines the health, the health, and then also the doctors that you have and access to medical treatment. Definitely with COVID-19, we can see the differences. We can see how it's completely different in different communities. So I think restorative justice can help in that way, if I'm answering that correctly, Shailly, because yeah.
I'm not sure exactly what the questioner was asking, but I know Professor Alford has also done a lot of work in health area. If you wanted, Professor Alford.
I think in terms of restorative justice in public health, the opportunity to actually see beyond the person that's presenting is important. When I say the person that's presenting, is because oftentimes when people hear about health issues, if it does not involve their reality, then they dismiss it, and they make it, they blame the individual instead of those other socioeconomic realities that exist that's beyond the individual's control. And so that's when we start really thinking about the systemic dynamic of why is there exists such a vast health disparity. Unless you have not unless, but restorative justice could allow us that opportunity to hear what it takes to even be compliant with the doctor's order, and especially what you're saying, Professor Jonnae, with a person with diabetes or some other issue, if there's no good foods or healthy foods in their particular environment, then that's a socioeconomic reality that a person who says, why don't they just eat right? Why don't they take more control of their health? You're casting this individual blame to a greater, broader issue of socioeconomic realities. And so what is happening, particularly in medical education and training, and when my work in terms of integrating critical race theory, critical race feminist theory in medical education, is to expose doctors and physicians in training of those realities, such that perhaps their response to that patient is not so much of what it is that they cannot do, but to understand that they may need other help other dimensions, a social worker. They may need access to going to get the food. So having that, I think, beyond the reality, having the beyond the reality phenomenon to occur can occur in a restorative justice model, in just talking about it, in hearing about it, in thinking about what are the other possible reasons the person is not being compliant? What are the other possible reasons that the person's health is what it is? And not just blaming the individual, but understanding that if you are the entity, then you have a responsibility and an obligation and a duty to do something about it.
Thanks, Charles. I think we're ready for the next question. Yeah.
All right. So the next one comes from an anonymous attendee. They say, what is the role of punishment in restorative justice, particularly in matters of race, reckoning, and reconciliation in the U.S.?
Ms. Miller, you've been thinking about that. Do you want to talk about that? No? No? Tim, do you want to talk about that?
So punishment, it's difficult because you know, when I in the context of my work as a public defender, I know that the lens of punishment comes from either the district attorney or the victims or the families of the victims who've been harmed, and a lot of times that punishment is articulated through vengeance. They want vengeance. And I don't think punishment is about or should be about vengeance. And when you talk about race relations and reconciliation, it can't be about even the score, because that's what gave us Rwanda, that's what gave us the horrors of the Holocaust, that's what gave us a lot of the things that happened worldwide. We're trying to even the score. Punishment has to be about, depending, of course, on what the person is faced with, punishment has to be fair. It has to be something that, and we all have to weigh in on what the fair. One side doesn't get to choose what's fair. This is what's so good about restorative justice, is that you have a circle of people, a community of people who decide what's fair. One person doesn't get to decide what's fair, and so it's multidimensional, it's multifaceted as to what goes into it. But one thing I do know, it can't be about vengeance. It can't be about payback. It can't be about making an example of. It has to be something that people take away from it, not embittered, not angry about, not frustrated with. It has to be a sense. Going back to our elders in Africa and other indigenous people, when they meted out punishment, I think it was communal. It was communal, and it was understood this was the good for the communal. It was good for everyone, not just to go and strike it out against. So, but I think one thing I do know is that restorative justice takes that individual component away and takes that judgmental, punitive approach to punishment, which shouldn't define punishment at all.
Anybody else?
I agree 100%. I'm sorry.
No, go for it. Go
Okay.
for it.
I agree 100% with Mr. Roundtree that punishment, as far as restorative justice is involved, shouldn't be something that's centered around vengeance. For my opinion, I feel as if in order for quote unquote punishment to be truly effective, as far as how the American model has it set up, when individuals are placed in a position where, okay, they may be entered into the prison system or jail for whatever reason, the goal is that they're supposed to be rehabilitated into society. And I feel as if restorative justice allows for the people who are making decisions on how the quote unquote punishment is taking place look into the totality of the circumstances. They take into those different factors that may come into play as to why a particular incident may have happened. So to add a parable to that, it could be something like, okay, a teenager was shoplifting, and now we're going to see how in which we'll punish that individual for stealing, breaking the law. I feel as if restorative justice would be stepping and seeing, okay, why is this teenager stealing? Maybe they have a lack of resources at home. Maybe there's a way in which we can step in as a community and help them so that this doesn't become something that's continuously done and the recidivism rates can decrease. So that's all that I have to share on that.
I feel like the question, thank you. I feel like the question is talking about in the matters of race reckoning and reconciliation. So I kind of want to I think that the question is embedded in it, an idea of punishment. And I think that that's something that we should think about. Like, if we're having a conversation about race reckoning, is punishment necessarily the component, or is it that we are embracing a process to get to something? Because if what we're really talking about are really crimes against humanity, right? Like, what slavery is a crime against humanity. It's not like, you know, it's not just a street crime. It's a crime against humanity. And so if you're talking about crimes against humanity, I feel like it's not punishment, but it's like a different landscape that we're talking about. Like and I'm sort of pitching the later event that we have, which we're having documentary where Brian Stevenson is the subject of, and his organization started the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, Alabama. My son and I went to it. It was the most profound experience I've ever had in a public space, because bringing the stories of slavery to life through the dirt where lynching happened, or the diorama of the woman who is being sold to slavery as her baby is taken from her arms. After I saw that, I couldn't move. I could not move for 4 hours, because what I could not gather around my head is how a human being could watch another human being have her baby taken from her. You know, I'm a mother, so like it's primal, right? What woman stood there and watched this? How did this happen? So then I realized this is a crime against humanity. Well, this is bigger than an idea of punishment that we understand. So I just want to sort of make sure that that question gets its just due, because I think it's a broader, yes, Miss Miller.
Sorry, with you.
No, sorry.
Switching the question around like that, I also wanted to share something. No, because I feel like that may be more of an effective way to discuss it. I feel as if looking at it, like you said, as a punishment isn't really an accurate portrayal of what it is. I feel as if it's a win-win for everyone. Everyone is able to have a voice. Everyone is able to express what it is that they have concerns with. They can be vulnerable, express their experiences, and just have an open space to share everything. And I feel as if as a country, we're only as strong as our weakest link. So if there's a system that's been embedded and in place for centuries and for as long as we can trace it, that has caused a certain group of individuals to be held back, I feel as if restorative justice opening that conversation and allowing us to propel as a country is a win for everyone. It's not necessarily looking to punish a particular group for something that has been done for time over time.
Right. Can we sort of, I know that we could probably talk about this for another hour, but can we sort of end with what we're all saying with restorative justice is that it's a process where we come to that wisdom of what the reckoning requires. We can't show up for the circle in our model with the answer, because that's defeating the purpose of having the process. Could we sort of all feel okay with that answer for now? Yeah? Charles, we're ready for more, I guess.
Yeah.
All right.
If I could add just something that I'm thinking, the role of restorative justice could be in dealing with justice is the vehicle to acknowledge racism. The thing that we don't talk about, we talk about it in a very generic sense. It's like you do the crime, you do the time, punishment. But if the current status quo is that it is impacting races differently, then perhaps this race restorative justice as a model could be the vehicle or the modality to see racism and speak on the racism and the racial disparities that are before us. I think that we're having a lot of conversations about the system, but until you really acknowledge race and racism, you're still going to get to the same result. Another police killing, it just keeps going because we haven't stopped to acknowledge the racism that is a part of the system that exists. And if a new model or another model such as restorative justice can do anything, is to put it at the forefront and not that be the silence in the room or that which we don't want to talk about.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Great. And now we move on to the next question coming from Karina. And they ask, there are schools that are fascinated by restorative justice practices, but teachers show hesitation. How do you overcome that hesitation and address their concerns?
Miss Davis just joined us, a principal of a school. Perfect.
Great.
Hello, everyone. Such an important question. And it's part of the reason that I stay connected to TRC, because there is something really powerful about, I used this word during the panel about the authenticity of the work. And there's so many sort of programs that are very shallow, that don't really embrace the philosophical underpinnings of why they exist. And restorative justice programs are often in that pocket. And one place that is really important is to actually